Is there something innate that makes learning to play jazz easier for some people than it is for others? Is it just the case that some people can do it and others can't? Is the ability to improvise something that can be learned, or is it something you're born with? If you're new to the channel, my name is Chase Sanborn and I'm a jazz trumpet player located in Toronto. The topic for today was sparked by a comment that I received on this video. The writer takes issue with some of the things that I said about the challenges of learning to play jazz as an adult. This is disingenuous. You can play jazz. It's your job. If you could not do it, you'd be doing something else or starve. I don't know your background, but I'm guessing you were coming from a position of privilege where your parents were able to afford you a jazz education long before adulthood. Okay, so frustration is evident in what this person writes, and it's caused me to self-reflect on the question of to what degree an individual's success as a jazz musician is based on internal factors that we can loosely describe as talent, or external factors such as early musical training. Throughout my career, I've heard people say things like, "I'd love to be able to play jazz, but I never had the talent for it." Sometimes that comes from accomplished classical musicians, and it seems to overlook the fact that they weren't born knowing how to play a concerto either. I think sometimes people don't understand how you can learn to improvise, just as you can learn to play written music. Yes, it's different when you aren't instructed what notes to play, and an improvising musician is more personally invested in the construct or the composition of the music, but it's a skill you can learn if you're willing to put in the time and the effort to do so. Now, that's not to say that the ability to do so doesn't vary. As individuals, we're all better suited for certain things by virtue of physical or mental characteristics that we're born with. Some people are exceptionally intelligent, some people are naturally athletic, some people have a beautiful singing voice. At a height of 5'4", it wouldn't have mattered how many hours I spent practicing basketball. I wouldn't make the NBA. I could definitely get better at it, but I'd have to accept the physical limitations of what I was born with. Would those limitations diminish my pleasure in playing basketball? Well, maybe they would. And maybe that steered me away from it when I was growing up and towards something for which I was better suited. Does an aspiring musician face similar limitations? It could be a factor, but not to the same degree. Pianists might benefit from having larger hands, a tuba player from having greater lung capacity, and some might say that a trumpet player should exude a bold personality. But we can point to great musicians on all these instruments without those physical attributes who still succeed magnificently. The comment asserts that playing jazz is my job, so of course I'd have to be good at it or I'd starve. It's true that you'd have to attain a certain level to work as a professional musician, just as with any other skilled pursuit. But the question remains, what are the factors that enable or prevent a person from reaching that level? I should clarify that playing jazz was never my job, although I'm closer to that now than I ever was. During my peak years, playing the trumpet was my job, and when I look at the money I earned as a performer, very little of it came from playing jazz per se. That's the reality for many, if not most, professional jazz musicians. But it was the love of jazz music that drove me to develop my abilities as a trumpet player to the point that I was able to learn my living as a musician. As a case study, in terms of natural ability, I would put myself no higher than middle of the pack compared to my professional colleagues. I suppose that puts me ahead of the general population, but that's also a function of how much time I've devoted to music. I can't identify in myself any intrinsic musical ability that sets me apart from the average person. I don't have perfect pitch or an innovative artistic vision. In fact, I describe myself more as a craftsman than an artist, and I talk about that in this video. There are two personal qualities, though, that I would say have served me well, and they are dogged determination and a willingness to work hard to achieve a goal. As the commenter surmised, I did benefit from early musical training. I grew up in a town with a good school music program, one that allowed us to choose and borrow an instrument in the 5th grade. Trumpet was actually my third choice. They ran out of saxophones before they got to last names starting with the letter S, and it was determined that my arms were too short for the trombone. I'd say that they probably still are, except for this one. That actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise because the elementary school band teacher was a very good trumpet player. I did reasonably well in my first year or two thanks to his qualified instruction and my parents who encouraged me to practice each day by making it a prerequisite for watching my favorite TV program, which was Superman. Some things stick with you. In middle and high school, my parents were willing and able to pay for private trumpet lessons, and that gave me a solid grounding in the fundamentals of the instrument. In my years as a university professor, it's been rare to see a trumpet player come into my studio with a similar level of ability on the horn. That says less about me than the deterioration of support for public school music programs. By my last 2 years in high school, I had a musical career in my sights, and I was serious about it. I commuted several hours each way to study with a specific brass teacher, and I practiced 3 hours a day. I was the president of the Student Band Association, which I know will impress you, and I convinced the school to let me out of gym class so that I could practice during that space of time. I considered that to be a coup. In my hometown, I really didn't have any jazz education to speak of other than school stage bands and forming little combos with my friends. None of my teachers were jazz players, and nobody in my family had any background or even interest in it. So that was something I developed on my own. My formal jazz education began when I attended Berklee College of Music, and that was a period of intensive personal growth. I was putting in 4 to 5 hours of daily practice, in addition to ensembles and nightly jam sessions. My practice sessions included an hour a day transcribing solos, and if I point to one thing above all others that taught me the language of jazz, it was that. Here again, I was fortunate that my parents had saved enough money to pay for my undergrad education. In this video, I talk about the cost of tuition and the burden of being saddled with student loans. Being free of that was a huge advantage as I made my initial forays into the professional world. From that time onwards, though, success or failure lay squarely on me. We all have moments in our careers when opportunities present themselves, and that's when preparation comes into play. Some years ago, on a long-distance plane flight, I was reading Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, in which he describes the 10,000-hour rule, that being the number of hours someone has to practice in order to become an expert in anything. Having been a professional musician for several decades at that point, I attempted to calculate how many hours I'd practiced over the course of my life. Since I didn't keep a practice log dating back to the 5th grade, it was at best an informed guess, but my calculations had me hitting the 10,000-hour mark around age 25. That seemed in line with Gladwell's conclusions, since by that time I was supporting myself as a trumpet player, not in any grand style, but still, and I'd spent a year on the road playing with Ray Charles. I don't know how we define expert, but I think if you hire a professional, whether that's a musician or a plumber, you hope they are one. Still, at the time I was doing those calculations, quite a few years had passed and my skills had increased substantially along with my experience. So I guess we can say there are varied levels of expertise. If I extend the calculations to the present time, when I still practice 1 to 2 hours every day, I estimate that I've amassed 30 to 40,000 hours of practice time, which averages out to about 4 years of my life. I'm talking only about individual practice hours, all of them self-directed and unpaid. So to whatever degree I have some innate ability or talent for playing jazz or music in general, and notwithstanding the help and the support I received growing up, I invested a lot of personal time and effort to get to wherever it is that I am now. So, how does any of this relate to someone who's in their later years of life and is now trying to learn how to play jazz? It's not likely at this point that you're going to rack up 30,000 hours of practice. So when my adult students lament that they're not progressing as fast or as far as they hoped, I somewhat cheekily tell them that they are never going to be as good as me, let alone the multitudes of musicians who leave me in the dust, most of them younger and better looking. In the end, we all have to accept that no matter what we do, we'll never be as good as we'd like to be, so we have to be content with being as good as we can be. If for you, that means learning to play jazz, well, I'm here to help in whatever way that I can. All I ask in return is that you click the like button right now and stay tuned for more jazz tactics.